So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, that's sort of you sort of answered your own question there, because it's a name change, and that people can get easily confused because we hear moderate rebels, the Free Syrian Army, the SDF, and then you hear Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, and then I think it's I can't even remember the name of the new version of Al Nusra, but then you hear ISIS and ISIL and all that kind of stuff, and people tend to think that these are different organizations. Now, at the very lower levels, some of these groups do indeed fight one another because they are made up of legitimate fanatics, and this is the nature of a fanatic, right? If you happen to wear a tie on a Wednesday, then you're sinning against God and you have to be killed. But at the higher levels, these are not just merely fanatics. These are essentially controlled by Western intelligence agencies, by NATO intelligence agencies, and so forth. And what the most simple way to realize what these people are, right? You can look at when we went into Iraq in 2003, we had the development of Al-Qaeda organizations. One was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that was the Iraqi version of Al-Qaeda. And then in Syria, we had Al-Qaeda in Syria, but they called themselves Al-Nusra. Now, eventually, there was a public merger between the two, and they called themselves the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant. That's IEIL. That name was then changed to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Ah, interesting.
We got
so
ISIS,
it was a merger.
Right, and of course Daesh is just sort of a derogatory way to refer to them, but it's all the same groups, and they can say, well, Nusra has broken away from ISIS, and then Al-Qaeda has, eschewed ISIS, and then all of this, but it's the same group. It's legitimate. It's literally the same group with a different name. Of course, Nusra has now changed its name to something else. It doesn't matter. These names
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Now. So, and these are mostly Sunni, right? These people, they're mostly Sunni.
All Sunni, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then you have Saudi Arabia, which is Wahhabi, which is Sunni, though. So they are what? They are funding, or they haven't funding this ISIL.
Well, there's a number of countries that have been doing this. Saudi Arabia has been the one that's been the most open, or at least the least concerned about being, exposed for doing this. Saudi Arabia has provided a lot of the manpower. They've also provided a lot of the weaponry, which has been funneled from the U.S. So don't make a mistake. It's not just Saudi Arabia. That's not the head of the snake. The United States is actually providing ISIS with weapons, and it is coming through Saudi Arabia. Right? We've openly admitted that the U.S. is giving money and weapons to these so-called rebels. They are the same thing as ISIS, and it's coming through Saudi Arabia. Turkey is another country that has aided in the creation and the training and the facilitation of ISIS coming in from the Turkish border into Syria. Jordan has been used as a staging ground for the training of ISIS. In fact, a lot of what has been officially called ISIS, that sort of surge of jihadist fighters that came a couple of years ago, those fighters came off of training bases in Jordan. That's when we started the name ISIS being thrown around. Israel, of course, is another. Israel has been repeatedly videotaped giving aid to ISIS fighters and terrorists in Syria for the purpose of facilitating their attacks inside the country. And, of course, it's not just Saudi Arabia and the Gulf either. We have Qatar, the other Gulf states who are supporting, even Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, who are supporting these fighters as well. But I would caution people not to look at Saudi Arabia as the head of the snake here, because this is a Western-backed policy. This is a NATO policy, particularly the United States, Britain, and France, the most bloodthirsty of that grouping.
But why, Brandon? Is it because all these countries are Sunni? Is that really the basis? I'm not talking about the outside forces, the Western NATO countries, the United States forces, and the Israeli forces, but the actual countries that you mentioned. Is it because they're all Sunni that they're doing this?
Well, Saudi Arabia is held together through religious extremism, and that the Saudi royal family, they can profess Sunni Islam all they want, but these guys are degenerates. They're certainly not pious people, but it's used. That brand of religion is used in order to facilitate this type of terrorism. It's not a religious war. That's something else I would like to mention here. I hear a lot of people, when you talk about Syria, you get the knee-jerk response, they've been fighting for 1,000 years, right? But this is not true, right? Syria was the safest country in the Middle East, one of the most diverse and tolerant places. In fact, it is the most diverse and tolerant places in the Middle East. But the Saudi brand of Wahhabism, which has been used to control the Saudi people for so many years in this theocracy, is also being used to stir up and control these fundamentalists coming from the deserts of Saudi Arabia, and of course even coming from Libya as well, and other African countries and Middle Eastern countries, where they're pulling them in and using Wahhabism to unify them under a certain banner.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
The people that they're killing, so it's not just Sunnis attacking Shiites or attacking Alawites. This is Sunnis, meaning ISIS and the Saudi and American-funded terrorists, attacking Sunnis, right?
Really?
They kill Sunni. Yeah, the Syrian people are Christian, Sunni, Shiite, Alawite. It's a very diverse mix. There's Kurds there too, and Druze. There's all kinds of religions there in Syria. And the ISIS terrorists, the FSA, all of them have been killing Sunnis, Shiites alike. There is no.
So Brandon, why is it that in the U.S. there are so many Syrians who live here that are so right wing? I'm going to call them right wing. That's the way I'm going to call them. When it comes to this whole issue of what's happening in Syria, they're against Assad. They say he's a dictator, and there's no freedom there, and they're really against the Assad government. Is there any ideas in your mind as to why that is? Is it because they're all living here? Is that what it is? That they're not there anymore, or?
I'm going to be honest with you. That is not the experience I have had when I've talked to Syrians who've lived here or other places. I'm in contact with Syrians who are living outside of Syria and Syrians who are living inside of Syria, and that's not the picture that I get coming from it.
So then, I have been propagandized by our media then, because the media only shows you those types of people.
Yeah, well, notice if you're getting this from the media, I would take a look and see where these people are coming from. Are they part of the U.S. Center for Middle East Studies or something that's funded by the State Department? I just made that up.
Right. Yeah. So okay, that's what it is. That's what it is. I'm so naive because every time I see Syrian Americans talking, they're always against the Assad and for regime change, and I didn't realize that there's a reason for that. That's not kosher, as our Jewish friends would say. Now, what about the Libya situation with the attack on the consulate and Hillary Clinton's emails? Can you expound upon that for our audience? Your view about what really went on there?
Well, it's now been released in terms of the emails. It's public information now that Ambassador Chris Stevens was absolutely a part of an operation to take weapons from the destroyed Libyan government and ship them to terrorists in Syria to use against Assad. Now that's virtually on record. I've done articles on that as well, and people can look it up and see the Defense Intelligence documents that came out in that regard, and how he was bringing them to ships that were going into Syrian ports and that sort of thing. Hillary Clinton's involvement, I couldn't think of a bigger psychopath. Her and Dick Cheney are two people who are eat two peas in a pod. As you mentioned, after Gaddafi was brutally murdered, she gets on TV and says, "We came, we saw, he died," and cackles like that. Right? This is
unbelievable. Sodomize him. I mean, they sodomize him, and they're bragging about it. And they're bragging about it.
So we have all of that, and again, we mentioned the destruction of a country that had the highest living standards in Africa. Now it is essentially turned back to the Stone Age. An anarchy. There's not even a central government. There's a government of national accord, which the United Nations recognizes, but which can't even fully get control of Ceuta now. So the country's in absolute shambles. And this is the handiwork. This is the democracy and freedom that we export, right? This is what's happened to every country that we've exported this democracy and freedom to.
So Brandon, so what's happening here, in your estimation, is that the neocons who are running things and have been running things, whether it's under Obama or it doesn't matter, it's all the same. So they have already started to begin a new Cold War, right? With Russia.
Absolutely. They've absolutely done that. And it's not just the Middle East, by the way. We also have the Ukraine situation, in which, again, tells you that Russia tried to take over Ukraine and has destroyed a peaceful country, and the United States is just too weak to stop them. This is the opposite of the truth. Again, that was another Western-backed color revolution that put Poroshenko now in charge, and the Russians simply acted in self-defense there. And it doesn't.
Well, here's what gets me. But Jaden, here's what gets me. What really makes me crack up is the fact that, and I know a lot of American. I have a lot of Jewish friends, obviously, and I grew up in Brooklyn. Most of my childhood and adult friends are Jewish. I can't believe that some of the American Jewish people and Israel itself is not outraged by the fact that the Ukraine is being virtually run by neo-Nazis. It's astounding, isn't it?
Well, not Israelis. I mean, I wouldn't put Jews and Israelis in the same category necessarily. The Israelis tend to jump onto that mantle when it suits them and to get attention and protection. But I wouldn't certainly put the Jewish people as a whole into the group with the Israelis. But it is funny though when you point out, if you look at the Middle East, our media is constantly harping about the threat to Israel, right. And they'll talk about the Holocaust and to remind us all about that. But in Ukraine, there are, as you said, literal neo-Nazis in charge of much of Ukraine, and not a single word is said about it. And these guys are not, this is not theoretical. They're actually going out with Nazi insignia. And
yeah. I mean, they have memorabilia. They have memorabilia. They have older Ukrainian men and even women who were around, and who have an affiliation with the Nazis, with the Germans.
Yeah, their hero is Stefan Bandera, which was a guy who fought for. They've of course attacked Jews on a number of occasions there in Ukraine, and not one word was said in the Western media. If I could though, I want to mention when we talked about Syrians being portrayed in the media over here as being against Assad. There was a famous case of a guy named Syria Danny. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. He was supposed to be these democracy-loving freedom fighters who all he wanted was a free country for his family so he could express himself and be free. He was on CNN every day, right, giving his report about all the atrocities of the Assad regime, and they would go to him live. He'd give reports on the ground. This is about 2011, 2012 maybe. And CNN would always have him there every night. Well, what happened was that it turned out Syria Danny was a fraud. The videotape started rolling early, and they could hear him coordinating gunfire So it makes him sound like he's getting attacked by a silence. You can hear him at the beginning of the podcast say, "Do we have the gunfire ready yet? Do we have the gunfire?"